If you're one of those people who likes to use macros to work more efficiently, taking repetitive tasks and turning them into a single command, you'll be glad to know there are very few changes when it comes to working with macros in Excel 2003 versus Excel 2010, but we do need to talk about the differences. We'll start here in Excel 2003 with an expense report. And let's just say we like to apply the same formatting to the titles in our expense reports. And if you ever find yourself repeating tasks, it might be a good idea to consider creating a macro to run those tasks every time. Well, we do have a title here for expense report. We'll just click up anywhere in the text for expense report. And before we start applying the formatting changes, we'll record it as a macro. So each of our steps will be recorded in Excel 2003. That means going to the Tools menu, then down to Macro, and over on the right-hand side, you'll see Record New Macro. So we'll give that a click. And now we just have to give it a name. So let's call it expense title. So this will be applied to all of our expense report titles. You could even create a shortcut key if you wanted to, so you could use a keyboard shortcut to run this each time, but we'll just click OK. And this little toolbar appears with a stop button for when we're done. Everything we do now, moving forward, is being recorded, so we want to be very careful. So here with expense report already selected, we'll make some changes. Let's go to the font drop down, for example. And we'll change the font. I'm going to choose something like Tahoma. Let's double up the size from 12 points to 24. And we'll change the color as well to a nice green color. There we go. And when we're done, all we have to do is click that stop button. You could also go back to the Tools menu if you needed to and do it from there, but we'll click Stop Recording. And we've just created a macro that we can use again and again. So let's say we wanted to run this macro. It's very simple. We go back to the Tools menu and run the macro. Let's flip over, though, to Excel 2010. We're going to go to our expenses here, where we've got the exact same expense report in the new format. Well, to run a macro here, we first, again, go to the actual text that we're going to be applying the formatting to, and then we'll record our steps. We do it a little bit differently from here, though. We go to the View tab on the ribbon, and way off to the right-hand side in its own group, you'll see macros. Click the drop down. We can view our existing macros or record a macro. And when we click record macro, it's very similar. Again, we have to give it a name. We'll call this expense titles. We can create the keyboard shortcut if we wanted to, choose where to store it if it's only going to be in this workbook, or if you wanted to go into a new workbook or a personal macro workbook, you could do that as well. We'll just leave the defaults and click OK. Right, so now we're recording. Everything we do, you'll see a little stop button now at the very bottom here in our status bar. And we'll go back to expense report if we've deselected it. Go to the Home tab now and do those same things. We'll choose Tahoma from our list. You may have to scroll way down to find it. And we'll make the same changes to the size, doubling it up. And to the color, for the font color that is, we'll go to a nice dark green. Maybe go a little bit darker even. We've got more color options here in Excel 2010. And once we've got everything done that we want, we click that stop button. Again, you could go back to the View tab and do it from there, but we'll click Stop, and now we've got our new macro. So how do we run this macro? Well, first, let's change our expense report back to something else. So we'll choose a different font, we'll choose a different size, and we'll choose a different color. All right, it's still selected. We want to run the macro. So we'll go to View, we'll go to Macros, and view the macros that we have. And in this case, we only have the one that we just created called Expense Titles. And we'll click Run, and it's run just like that. Even better would be to create a shortcut button. Here in Excel 2010, you have to add the shortcut button to the Quick Access toolbar. So in Excel 2003, it could be added to any toolbar you like, but in this case, we're adding it to the Quick Access toolbar. Click the drop down. Now from here, we're not going to be able to see it on the default list, but we can go to More Commands. And instead of Popular Commands, we'll click the drop down. We want to look at our macros. And there's only one there called Expense Title, so we'll select it, click Add, and click OK. And now you'll notice we've got this little icon up here representing our Expense Titles macro, and anytime we need it, we click the button, and it's applied to our selected content, just like that. Now here's the biggest difference when it comes to working with Excel 2003 and Excel 2010. Your workbook, when you save it in Excel 23, is saved with the macro, and that's okay. Here in Excel 2010, they made a change. You have to create a macro-enabled workbook, and it's a bit of a security feature. So when you share or collaborate with other people, they'll be prompted. They'll be shown that this is a workbook containing a macro, and they have to okay that, whereas it was the default in Excel 2003. Macros can be used maliciously, so when you save your workbook, you have to indicate that it is a macro-enabled workbook. You can also do the same for templates, and here's how we do that. We'll go to Backstage View, clicking the File tab, and then choose Save As. And you'll notice by default, the format we're about to save in is the new XML-based format. If we tried to save this with the macro, we would see a message indicating we can't save it with the macro. But if we click this little drop-down, you'll notice we do have an option for saving as an Excel macro-enabled workbook, and the extension will be .xlsm. And if it was a template you were creating, you also have an Excel macro-enabled template option here. So you have to choose this if you want to save your macro with your workbook. So we'll do that, and we'll click Save. And we now have our macro-enabled version of our workbook. Now keep in mind too, you can save this back to an Excel 2003 format because macros were automatically enabled back then. You just have to make sure that the steps in the macro are steps and functions that were available in Excel 2003 for the macro to work properly when running it in Excel 2003. So just a few changes, very similar still to creating macros, but a few options that will make working with macro-enabled workbooks a little safer.